As the Ukrainians' resistance proved stronger than Putin could predict, Russia is reportedly getting help from 1,000 Chechen volunteers ready to fight on their behalf. Joining us now with analysis is congressional candidate for Virginia's 7th District and Army Special Forces veteran, Derrick Anderson. Derrick, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Chechen fighters, known to be fierce fighters, mostly Muslim, introduced potentially into Ukraine. What's the dynamic? It's about 1,000 kilometers, Derrick, from Chechnya to Ukraine. There's plenty of opportunities for them to get there. Were they to be introduced into the battlefield, what kind of dynamic does that create?
Yeah, Pete, and the reports that I'm hearing from the ground right now is that the Chechens are actually even closer to just from Chechnya. They're actually in and around Ukraine already. The big dynamic that brings is we all know that the Chechens are urban fighters. They're able to go into the cities and fight a war that Russia is not prepared to fight, actually. And what brings an interesting dynamic to this is if you go back to kind of the mid-90s and look at what in Chechnya, what the Chechens fought and how they fought against the Russians, is the Russians typically have taken the mindset of they mortar the cities and they go in and they soften up the cities and then they send in ground forces. And back in Chechnya and back in the mid-90s, the Chechens were able to fight against the Russians and be able to do that in a way that they had not seen or they weren't prepared for. Well, in this instance, what this kind of indicates and this shows is that the Russians realize that there is going to be an urban fight. And that the Russian forces aren't capable or able to take that urban fight the way that they want to. So they brought in the Chechens. And so I think that that's going to bring in a really, really interesting dynamic, and it really kind of shows the hand and forecast what Russia is doing. One, we know that means that the Russians know that this is going to turn into an urban fight. Two, I believe that this also shows that the Russians aren't capable and ready to take their conventional forces into an urban environment and therefore bringing the Chechens in there. And then from two other sides that are also interesting, Putin gets to actually take back to the homeland, if you want to call it, and say, hey, we reduced our casualty numbers, because if the Chechens are being killed, Putin doesn't care about that. All he cares about is the number of Russians that are actually being killed and what is bringing back to the homeland as the number of people being killed. And they're going to have heavy casualties once they go into the urban areas. And then lastly, there's something to be said about the Chechens, as you said, Pete, are a fierce fighting force, meaning they're going to go in there. And there have been tons of reports of violations from the international community of what the Chechens have done throughout the world. In Afghanistan, we even saw them, I remember distinctly looking and fighting the Taliban and saying, man, these guys are pretty good fighters. I'm very curious how these guys are fighting so well. And in fact, it was Chechens. We were getting reports that Chechens were fighting alongside the Taliban in Afghanistan. So it gives a clean hands approach for Putin to be able to say, hey, guess what? That wasn't us that were doing these heinous things into Ukraine.
Somebody else.
That was the Chechens.
Real quick, Derrick, we only have 30 seconds. The introduction of a Switchblade drone, which is effectively a kamikaze drone, can be flown into targets from 25 miles away. How important would that be for Ukraine at this moment?
Yeah, it's very important, especially, hopefully we don't just send 100. I've seen reports that there's only going to be 100 sent. Yeah. I think this would be a huge, huge hit if we were to send several thousand. But the Switchblade is important. So the reason why it is because it's easily deployable. It's cheap, and if this does go into an urban fight, like I was saying, the Ukrainians are going to be able to take that thing and use it in an urban environment and be able to target windows, doors, and level the playing field and reduce collateral damage.
Interesting. You're right. It's about $6,000 per munition, which in military speak is quite cheap. Derrick Anderson, thanks for your time, your service as a Green Beret, and good luck in your race. Appreciate it.
Thanks again, Pete. Thanks for having me.
You got it. All right, now we're going to toss it over to Joey for some headlines.